It was disappointing Saturday. We've got a huge game tonight against Turkey. Seems to still go our way. We qualify automatically, but if not, we're going to have to fall back on that playoff like we did for the World Cup.
Well, let's look forward to tonight's match against Turkey. It's going to be hard, I think, for Rob Page to focus 100% on his match in Cardiff. He'll surely have an eye on Croatia versus Armenia as well, won't he?
Yes, of course, and I've been in those situations myself where we're in the final game of the group and there's another game going on elsewhere at the same time, and like you said, there is half an hour now, but we've just got to make sure we get a job done tonight. If we get those 3 points, which will be huge, then who knows what happens elsewhere.
It's hard to imagine that the Croatians will fall.
Who knows, we caused an upset against Croatia, I suppose, in the last group. But the Welsh fans will hopefully can beat that tonight. Because I know what it's like at Cardiff City Stadium. You get it bouncing, you get 3 points, and then we'll see what happens elsewhere.
So the tactic tonight must be attack, attack, attack. Is that right?
Yes, of course. I think that would be a great tactic, but we have to be aware. Turkey are group leaders. They've been a great team, and they've shown how strong they are in this group. We lost to them away 2-0 earlier in this group, and that was a tough night for Wales. But look, we need to get 3 points and just see what happens elsewhere.
Sam Rhodes, thanks very much.
Thank you, Rob.
And a line from the Cricket World Cup in India of a record attendance for the competition as a whole. Some 1.25 million spectators attended a total of 48 matches. A figure described as staggering by the ICC. Here are the six. Midfield 110, number 4, Pyrotechnics. Playing 230, number 5, Pretending. Look at 2 previous.
Rob, thank you very much. Now let's turn to Jim Al-Khalili on this morning's The Lifeline.
Hello. This morning I'm meeting the son of an East London taxi driver who came up with one of the key concepts in quantum mechanics. He'd be explaining how it comes into play when I inch my car into a tight parking space. And in case that isn't quite crystal clear, I'll ask him to explain it through the medium of holding cats upside down and dropping them. The concept is the Berry phase, named after my guest today, Sir Michael Berry. He's one of Britain's top physicists, and he loves to show how things we see in our everyday life, like light dancing on the bottom of a swimming pool, or rainbows in the sky, can teach us about the science that underpins the universe. Join me if you can for the Life Scientific after the news at 9.
Poetic pride. Thanks, Jim. And a look at the weather, not sure about rainbows, but a bright start in Northern Ireland, Scotland, turning cloudy later with some light rain in Cardiff. You're listening to Today on BBC Radio 4 and it's for the summary.
The leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, has said his group is close to agreeing a truce with Israel. Negotiators said they were working on a deal to secure the release of some of the hostages seized by Hamas last month in return for the release of Palestinian women and children in Israeli detention. The Chief Medical Officer for England, Professor Sir Chris Whitty, will give evidence to the COVID inquiry today. Yesterday, the former Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, said they disagreed over the timing of lockdown restrictions, with Sir Chris favouring a slower pace. New figures show that the government borrowed more than expected in October. The Office for National Statistics says net public sector borrowing, excluding the public year banks, was just under £2 billion. And pupils in Wales could soon have shorter summer holidays and longer breaks because of the spread of plans by the Welsh Government. Traditional school calendar is outdated, as children are encouraged to enroll.
a certain number of days in the past. But the deal that they were talking about before the ground was essentially in 5 days started in return for women and children. That's what I was talking about. So, we'll see what's happening. I think there's a lot of debate inside the government about the best way to do it. There'll be more hawkish people, you might say, saying, the president is not going to get that. And then the other side is the talking people who want to plan this very active demos on television to
哥，你用唔用到 WhatsApp 㗎而家？
saying that basically,
哥，
But in some cases, some of those families have
你用唔用到 WhatsApp 㗎而家？你用唔用到 WhatsApp 㗎？ 嚇？咁如果你冇 approve，咁咪喺 WhatsApp 嗰啲 video 咯。不過你都要有 WiFi 先得，你都要有 WiFi 先得。
And also the fact that there are these people who are landing a mass detention, nobody really knows where they are. So, yeah, some news and that's what we needed.
The timeline is 26 months as the film industry returns to work following the recent months of madness strikes. Industry figures are calling for health and safety to be made priority to avoid any more lasting harms. A series of psychotherapy situations about the hazards involved for actors and filmmakers are making sounds in nations. BBC's entertainment reporter said he had proven has been looking into the issue.
This is one of the last pictures of her.
Andrea Milton is looking through tributes to her cameraman husband and her daughter Alice.
Do you remember any of this?
Alice was just 11 when she lost her father. Mark Milton died when filming a stunt. The camera he was on should have been unmanned.
My only real memory of that day is I heard my mum scream and cry. There was this very nice policeman on my doorstep with my mother hysterical. And he said to me, there's been an accident and I don't know how to tell you this, but your husband's dead. It was just completely and utterly devastating. I still text him, say, yeah, something happened, I text him.
An inquest concluded the accident was entirely preventable. Amber left her with a conviction that there's a wider safety problem.
I'd like the health and safety officer to be on that set, hold these people accountable, hold their risk assessments accountable, and make sure that no family has to go through what we've been through. I think that until health and safety is no longer a box-ticking exercise, nothing's going to change.
Why do you think it isn't?
I think people are scared.
I've been speaking to dozens of people who work in the industry, from film crew and set designers to runners, who have either been injured or had near misses. They were too afraid to go on record for fear of being labelled troublemakers and not getting hired again, as they've seen happen to others. The health and safety executive told us that without a change in the law, it can only get involved after an accident is reported. And what's adding extra urgency to this is the rapid growth of the UK's film industry. When it comes to studio space, it's now bigger than Hollywood. So safety regulations, which were written in the 70s, are felt by campaigners to be simply out of date. Cinematographer Chris Ross is finally able to return to filming following the actors' strike. He's previously worked on big-budget films like Yesterday and Cats, and he leads the organisation that represents the UK's camera operators.
The industry is scaling up in a way that it's never been before. If the status quo stays the same, there will be more injuries, there will be more deaths. Fundamentally, the change needs to be industry-wide. If that requires a high-level change of law, then if that's what it takes, that's what it takes.
The family of cameraman Mark Milton has set up a foundation to help improve safety standards. Samantha Weinstein runs it.
The law, which was made in 1974, so it's nearly 50 years old, is not really currently fit for purpose. It does require employers to look out for the safety of their staff, but there's no requirement for somebody to prove that they've been trained. There's no certification which is recognised globally in this area.
that was Smith Wednesday, ending that report by Sophie van Bruggen. Well, here in the studio with us is a patron of the Mark Wilson Foundation, the actor Rory Kinnear. Good morning. And I was just remembering, it's been more than 30 years, hasn't it, since your own father, much-loved actor, Rory Kinnear, was killed in an accident himself.
That's right, yeah, nearly 35 years ago now. Doing a stunt which he needed to be doing, but the stuntmen themselves had said was too dangerous in the morning, and the director decided to put the ashes on the horses and send them over the bridge instead. But he died falling from the horse. And so when I heard about Mark's death and realised that another young child was going to grow up without their father as a result of an unnecessary accident on set, I wrote to them and became involved with the foundation.
And as an actor yourself, have you come across situations where you're being put at risk?
I think generally the feeling on sets is that the industry is predicated on the hope of the worst one, rather than necessarily preparing for it. And so what we as a foundation are seeking to change is that there's an industry-wide shift in attitudes towards safety on set. It is interesting how over the last few years decisions have been made for us both with the industry very quickly and very necessarily, and also with the agency coordinators as well. That has come in very rapidly and very successfully, and again necessarily. We're hoping that on the coattails of that there might also be looking as the need for industry-wide standardisation of safety protocols.
It can be hard, can't it, for junior people, and you can see it in the world of news as well, to speak out if they feel that something's unsafe, because could be seen as jeopardising the joint project.
Yeah, and I think that trying to the notion of the film set as being quite a strictly hierarchical society. And again, hopefully, that through talking about it and through opening up these conversations on sets, you try and break those hierarchies down. A, that people are able to feel confident enough to say when they don't feel comfortable or don't feel safe, and B, to end up the whole experience more of a collaborative one.
Did you find that as a young actor, that you were put on horseback yourself?
Well, initially I was asked my very first job out of drama school on the day itself, and again it was filmed in Gordon, in a hot country, and all the echoes were there, and my own father death, and yeah, I was asked to actually just decided on this thing I'd put me on horseback. Obviously I was able to say I don't feel comfortable, but I got some pushback to the point where I had to say, well, this is why I don't feel comfortable, and I have always advocated for safety on sets, both personally and my fellow actors and crew members, because I have such a strong trump card, you might say, to be able to play, but obviously not everyone is as secure in knowing the possible dangers, and particularly people entering in the industry for the first time are often the people put in places of most danger, and often the ones who are least inclined to speak up for themselves.
And I suppose if there were, as we're hearing suggested, in certain people, the idea of having health and safety officers on set who could intervene beforehand, that would make a difference, do you think?
Yeah, and also just people entering the industry, and with the foundation we are trying to advocate for a passport scheme that simply everyone has to pass before entering the industry. It's sort of a 90-minute video that the foundation themselves have produced and that I introduced. And similarly, when Tony was rampaging through the country and making our industry difficult, we were all expected to watch a 90-minute video, answer questions on it, and by doing so, you were able to go to work. You got a job. And it feels like this is something that we're offering as a foundation now, so that
what we advocate for the general public is, given that this consultation is just opening. I just want to mention that the ALN, which you both mentioned, is for anyone who does know additional learning needs, so particular needs of some pupils. Given that this consultation, I mean, presumably you will have to put a view forward as a union to this consultation. Are you against the idea now?
We're not against the idea, but what I would say is that there has already been consultations in Wales. The Welsh Government put out a consultation not that long ago, it was in the last year, which actually said there was no appetite for this school year, and maybe there would be potential to look at it further down the line. So there is clear evidence that says there is no appetite. There is also evidence from other countries around the world that school years, and particularly summer holidays, where countries have significantly longer summer holidays than they do in Wales, do exceptionally well. The point is
where is that?
what we want to see is a clear evidence base from the Welsh Government that any policy change within education, whether it be the school year or anything else for that matter.
Which countries, before I go back to Jennifer Ford, which countries are you citing as examples of that?
So we've got America, you look at Canada, you look at other national countries around the world, they have significantly longer summer holidays. We're not saying that we're opposed to this plan. We want to see more evidence that says it offers an absolute benefit to learners, because if we're going to upend the school year, that must be the drivers to it.
Jennifer Ford, what's the evidence that you put forward for learners significantly better? I know you can see that dip, but it may be that even a 4-week break doesn't really change that.
Again, anything is better, and I totally disagree with Laura. 27 countries have taken part in a recent evidence-based 20 of them are issues with well-being. That was shared yesterday at the National Head Teachers Conference. There's real evidence across every school I've worked with, and we were consulted. I took part in it. Unfortunately, that was the wrong time. We were coming back in the pandemic. But I would argue there's never been a better time to restructure. The national mission is bringing everything together. We in Wales have a curriculum that puts health and well-being at the heart of every learner's experience. You can't do that if your most vulnerable children, your really most vulnerable, are not even cited 6 weeks at a time. And I've got to stress here, preschooling stopped in Wales last month. You know, hunger is the biggest priority in the Rotherham year. It's a huge issue for us. And I would argue that as our staff here and staff in other schools, there is an appetite and to make this happen. I can't take gratitude.
Yeah, Head Teacher Jennifer Ford. We'll have to leave it there, Jennifer. And also Laura Dole from NAHT Cymru. Thank you.
Time now is 11 minutes to 9. Women of influence and inspiration from around the world have appeared on the latest BBC 100 Women list released today. This year they include more than 2 dozen climate pioneers, while one issue that links several women on the list is the effort to end child marriage. An estimated 12 million girls under the age of 18 are married every year around the world. Here's what our correspondent Ahmed found with some of the prominent 100 women on a trip to Malawi.
In central Malawi, a girls' school opens their doors to some very high-profile guests. Michelle Obama, Omar Clooney, and Melinda French Gates have joined forces to tackle child marriage, and this is their first field visit together. We are in Mchinji district, a region with high rates of child marriage. 42% of girls in Malawi and 12 million girls a year worldwide marry under the age of 18. I sat down with the 3 women to ask why the issue of child marriage is important for them. The former First Lady of the US, Michelle Obama, answered first.
I see my daughters in those girls, and if we just put ourselves in those girls' shoes and think of how would we feel if it were us or our daughters that were married off at the age of 12 or 10 or however old, and their dreams, their opportunities and aspirations were cut off completely, any of us would be outraged at the thought.
How urgent an issue would you call this? Because the UN has said this will take 300 years to end. The scary figure.
300 years is not a tolerable time frame. This is an urgent issue. The health of women and girls on this planet measures the health of our planet. This is an issue that can be solved tomorrow. If all the world leaders got together and made it a priority, it could happen in less than a generation.
For barrister Omar Clooney, outreach is one sustainable solution. She's supporting women lawyers in Malawi to physically travel to mudfies or villages.
We formed a network of mobile legal aid clinics, which means literally there's a van that goes out with lawyers and we go out in the community and say to girls, you know, these are your rights, and if you need a lawyer for free to protect you, that's what we are here to provide. The large-scale international organizations that we have that are supposed to be dealing with this, like the UN Security Council, like powerful governments, are not delivering, and so I think philanthropy then and individual lawyers can play and have to play a larger role with the determination that it takes to win a war.
To turn
discrimination may work in a courtroom, but can it apply to communities where women and girls have little say? I asked philanthropist Melinda French Gates if she'd chosen an impossible problem to look into.
This is a solvable problem. The rates are coming down when real work gets done. It's really a social norm problem. It's that, first of all, if you're a family that's in poverty, and so let's say you are scraping by and you don't have food in the house, why do they think about selling the girl child? Why aren't they thinking about selling the boy? They're valuing their sons, is the truth, more than their daughters. The only way to change social norms is at the community level. You get the community thinking differently about the girls. When you get enough villages standing up and saying no, then you start to bring the rates down.
I was raised, there were people in my community. Back in Lutzi School in central Malawi, Michelle Obama sits down at a table with a group of girls, listening to their stories.
There are so many girls like all of us all over the world.
There are going to be a lot of people listening to this say, this is not my problem. Child marriage has nothing to do with me. It's not in my community. What would you like to say to those people?
Disinvestment in women and girls is all of our issue, and it impacts us. In the United States, we're dealing with a rollback in reproductive rights, things that people thought they could take for granted, things that my girls thought that they could take for granted, that they would have the choice over their own reproductive health. And it's been a shock. And a lot of it is because of the devaluation of women, the belief that women don't have choice and power over their own being. That's what's happening here. When a 10-year-old is sold off to an older man because her family is poor, it's the same mentality, it's the same carelessness, the same selfishness, the same greed that exists everywhere.
That's the time. The time now is 6 minutes to 9. We've certainly seen the power of diaries in recent days in the COVID inquiry. So Patrick Vallance's exasperation with politicians, which he describes as the late night frustration.
At the end of each day, often quite late in the evening, I would just spend a few minutes jotting down some thoughts from that day, some things and reflections, and did it as a way to get that, in a sense, out of the way so that I could concentrate on the following day. These were private thoughts, they were instant reflections from the day, and once they were written, I actually never looked at them again. I mean, they were put in a drawer, and that was that. So they had no intention of doing anything else with them either.
So what does motivate people to keep diaries, and what value do they have? To this Samuel is a Samuel therapist in Madrid, whose works advertise their soul. And we've also talked to Adam Kay, who manages and kept diaries as a junior doctor, which became a best-selling book and joined the business and talent spoken to with his live show Undoctored. Good morning to you both. And Adam, if I begin with you, we know actually from your diary just how stressed and how hard work you work. So how on earth did you find the time or the motivation to keep a diary?
I did just like at the end of the day, like I'm on Instagram and things like that. It's just a thing I did like because you don't know what I was doing all the time. But in retrospect, it was I guess my way of the attitude of as a healthcare professional, as they tend not to be. I improvised with my own, and it was getting stuff out of my head all the time.
So he was getting it out of your head, so was that why it was a defensive mechanism, where expressing those ways that you're talking to yourself and talking to others?
Yeah, exactly that. Yes, instead of talking to professionals, talking to anyone professional, and just keep it gently up and down.
Let me bring you in, Julia, now. Are there psychological benefits, do you think, to holding on to these emotions at the time?
Yes, I think it's pretty well obvious. It's right to feel with the sad issues of the children and children. So it helps. What's been done says it activities take benefits. It helps regulate emotions, anxiety, and stress. It improves our immune system, our mood, and it often problem solves.
I meant to be read the next day, and I just thought this is the emotion and the clarification by writing that can't. Can you remember anything about what you said?
I think mostly doing it to focus on the lights amongst the dark, and I think I got benefit from that. But like I said at the top, I had no intention, because as it seems now, of it ever being seen or ever overheard.
Actually, you're quite resistant though to the idea of
Yeah, I mean, first time I was reckoning up the issue like some Bible, and with the 2016 I went up to the print, and I read out from some, at the time, documents to get the idea of what the struggle and not reading. And a publisher came along to one of these shows and said, how many more blogs do you want, do you want me to publish this book? And I think I said no 2 or 3 times, and to follow up, or eventually convinced me that it might be a book.
Which you're probably quite pleased about now.
Yeah, I'm extremely pleased.
Most people may not want of doing that, the option of having their diaries be published, but when people are writing verse, should they be thinking about their writing style and be subconscious in that way?
No, it's the free flow. And I think you can write 2 mindsets. You can write with a mindset I'm writing is just me to problem solve to, and as Adam said, where you put your attention, you get your outcomes. You want to go for the light, you want to go for the positive. And that's really helpful. A lot of people do write with their children, their grandchildren, their diaries. And so there's a slightly production lens on the writing, which is for others to read, and it probably isn't so nice.
I mean, that must be true for you now, Adam, because you must be aware that these people do it.
Absolutely. I think my diaries are now an awful lot better written. They're less helpful to me psychologically, because I know full well that at some point I'm going to be emailing them up to the publisher.
Adam, and Julia Samuel, thank you. Oh, I don't know about you, Simon, but apology.
We should. You're not keeping a diary after life on this program. I think we probably should be.
I'm not sure about it, what happens behind the scenes now.
That is it from us for this morning. Our editors were Claire Worden and Jack Holland. The studio director was Lee Wilson. From all of us on the program. Good morning.
BBC News at 9 o'clock. The leader of Hamas says his group is close to agreeing what he's calling a truce with Israel. The statement from Ismail Haniyeh has raised hopes that more of the Israeli hostages taken by Hamas to Gaza last month could be released soon. The Hamas leader didn't say what form the truce might take, and there's been no word from Israel. But our correspondent in Jerusalem, Nick Beat, says the signs are encouraging.
The optimism that was growing over the weekend, I think, has increased overnight, and that's because of the news that's been coming from Qatar. And what we've had is a statement from the Hamas leader, who actually lives in Qatar, and he's given the impression that they're reaching a truce, that they're moving towards this. He met last night the head of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, and this is a charity which previously has been involved in hostage negotiation.
The COVID inquiry will hear today from the Chief Medical Officer for England, Sir Chris Whitty. He's likely to face questions about the timing of lockdown restrictions. Yesterday, it emerged that he disagreed with the government's former Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, about when they should have been brought in. New figures show government borrowing went up by almost £4.5 billion in October compared with the same month last year. The Office for National Statistics says borrowing hit £14.9 billion last month, the second highest October figure since monthly records began in 1993. A legal challenge is being mounted today against legislation which would change the way killings during the Northern Ireland's so-called Troubles era are investigated. Suspects who cooperate with efforts to establish the facts behind the killings could be given a conditional amnesty under a new system, it's opposed by nearly all victims groups. And the Welsh Government has proposed cutting school summer holidays by a week and giving pupils a longer break in the autumn. It argues that the traditional school calendar takes children out of learning for too long, but the union said there was no evidence the changes would help children's education. BBC News.
One of our most brilliant scientists discusses rainbows, cats and quantum physics in just a moment. And then there's the difficult subject of how to talk to your children about pornography. Apparently, because of the rise of the internet, we should now start the conversation when they're as young as 9. But how on earth do you go about it? 1-to-1 is in half an hour. First on Radio 4, Professor Jim Al-Khalili meets one of Britain's greatest physicists.
Hello. Sometimes ideas in physics can feel so abstract that they border on philosophy. Concepts like higher dimensional space or time ceasing to exist, subatomic particles behaving like waves. Often it's when someone comes up with a simple analogy to explain these ideas that we can get, if not the full picture, at least a glimmer of understanding. This is particularly true in the area of science that my guest today, and yours truly, work in, theoretical physics. Please don't turn off. As well as being one of the most respected physicists in the world today, Sir Michael Berry continues the tradition of making complex ideas accessible. In his hands, even the blurred edges of a rainbow, the way light dances on the bottom of a swimming pool, can reveal deep mathematical secrets that underpin our very existence. His most famous contribution to science is an incredibly technical aspect of quantum mechanics. But thanks to his explanation comparing it to how we park our cars, by the end of today's conversation, you might just get that glimmer of understanding. Michael Berry, Emeritus Professor of Physics at the University of Bristol, welcome to the Life Sciences.
Thank you.
Michael, I'm looking forward to walking with you through your life story. But do you mind if we start walking through the front door of your house? Because I understand you have a collection of gadgets and trinkets that a physicist like me would love to see. Tell me about one or two of them.
Okay, I've got a collection of spinning tops and little optical toys and prisms and the like. Gadgets like this. I have fun.
You have a rocking chair that swings sideways, is that right?
Well, it can move in several directions. Nobody can sit still.
You've been obsessed with the nature of light throughout much of your career, and a lot of your gadgets have to do with optics, and lenses and mirrors. Tell me more about this magic oriental mirror.
Oh yes, that's a mirror which was originally created, and not my version, but the original 2,000 years ago in the Han Dynasty in China. The magic comes when instead of looking in the mirror, you shine a light on it and look at the reflection cast on the wall. You expect to see a disc of light, and you do. But inside that disc, you see a ghostly image of the pattern that's on the back of the mirror. I've had fun in relatively recent years explaining the rather curious optics of how this pattern on the back is ghostly reproduced on the front. It's a lovely device, very dramatic.
You study such a wide range of phenomena. In fact, you seem to have felt no need to focus on what might be regarded as the most important or the most fashionable questions.
I'm not a very competitive person, though. I think I lack the gene for competition, either in my through and through my interest with anything but sport. So I prefer to think quietly about matters that other people aren't studying. Of course, you run a risk that nobody's interested, but I've been fortunate in that some of the things I've studied turn out to be popular later. So in a sense, I've been lucky.
Well, Michael Berry, you were born in 1941, Second World War baby. Any early memories as a young child?
Yes, my earliest memories, very unclear. There was a bomb fell in the street, lots of noise, people running around. Another was I was in an air raid shelter with my grandmother, banging my head against the wall. I was crying and she was comforting me during the air raid. But this is all I remember.
It was in London?
It was in London. I was born just outside London. My father was a taxi driver. He'd been in the army for 7 years before the war in India. But he was then too old to go to the front line.
Were you evacuated?
Yes, Bournemouth, towards the end of the war. And my memory of that is in the nursery school. I was 3.5 years old. And I was very annoyed because we all had to lie down and sleep in the afternoon. And I didn't want to.
What was your mother like?
She was very intelligent, uneducated.
And her family is from
Ukraine.
You mentioned your father had served in the army. served in India. I gather that was quite unusual for a Jewish man.
It was very unusual, and he changed his name because there was a lot of anti-Semitism there. And his brother Ben called himself Ben Bennett, and his brother Morris called himself Morris Morris. But my father was more imaginative, and we don't know why.
And your parents, I mean, they split when you were a teenager, but it was a turbulent marriage, wasn't it?
They were very happy. I mean, he used to keep my mother, and she married. She didn't. She was much more intelligent than him. In a different era, she would have a completely different life.
Did this turbulence during your home life mean that school was a struggle for you?
I did spend some time in infant school, wondering whether when I got home my father would have killed my mother. He never would have done, I now realise. But when you're a kid, you can worry about things. But I am by nature a rather cheerful person, so I was preoccupied with my own more positive thoughts. But that unhappiness was there.
And what sort of student were you?
Well, I always managed to pass at just the level I needed to get to the next stage.
Were you encouraged to go to university by your parents?
No, this was largely incomprehensible to me, and I thought myself that I would go to university. Unfortunately, in those days, we had maintenance grants, which were almost automatic if you came from a family of university. When I applied, Bristol turned it down, so I went to Exeter, which was actually a good choice for me. I'd hardly ever visited the countryside as a kid, and when I went on the train and saw this red earth and these rolling hills as you approach Exeter, I thought, this is amazing, I must come here.
Well, Montefiore, you did go to Exeter to study physics as an undergraduate, and that's where you met your first wife, wasn't it?
Yes, I was a student, sociology, and we got married rather young, too young, but we were very good friends, by the way.
Well, I'm sure one of the things you don't regret is having your first child so early, very soon after you graduated.
That's right. It was very good to become a father young, as it has been to become a father much older. I mean, they're different experiences, but they're all worthwhile life experiences.
Having your first son, I gather, led you to get back in touch with your father. You've been estranged from your father until then.
Yes, not estranged in the sense of any hostility, but we just never encountered each other. When my son was born, I thought my father should know he's a grandfather. In those days, you could contact taxi drivers with the police. So I sent a letter to the police and said, could you find my father, Jack Berry? And indeed he contacted him. For the few years he lived, he died young, he died in his 50s, really friendly.
Well, Michael, you graduated from Exeter, then went north, all the way to St Andrews to do a PhD. What drew you to Scotland?
My professor in Exeter was a Scot, and when he knew that I had, by then, aspirations to be a theoretical physicist, he suggested that I should go to Scotland. And the first person he asked me to write to replied along the lines of, well, what we do is very difficult, you haven't studied mathematics systematically, it might be too difficult for you. So, my professor in Exeter said, well, he shouldn't have written that. But there's someone else, Bob Dingle in St Andrews, he's just arrived there, and he wants to build up a group of research students to write to him. He was very welcoming, and it was actually a perfect choice for me, as it turned out.
For presumably a little while.
Well, that's right, Evan. I mean, very tragic news. This is the story that the outcome that the families were sort of dreading and hoping desperately wouldn't come to light. We know that these four friends had left Shropshire on the weekend, on Saturday, heading to Eryri, Snowdonia, for what was believed to be a camping trip. And the weather was particularly bad on the Sunday. Now, I guess it's up to the police to work out how long that car had been in that condition, partially submerged, as you heard from the police there, in the water. But it sounds like this is quite a narrow bend, and particularly if it was late at night or early in the morning in difficult weather, that might have led to the conditions in which a car would leave the road. We have spoken to one or two people locally who said that they had passed that area over the last 24 hours or so and hadn't noticed anything untoward. So that perhaps gives you a sense of how well hidden this crash scene was and why it might have taken longer than usual for something like this to be spotted. And it was spotted by a member of the public early this morning after a large overnight search, and that involved members of the local mountain rescue team and the Coast Guard as well as the police helicopter. But they were then searching a much wider area because it wasn't exactly sure where these four had ended up placing themselves.
Yeah, and please ask me, press in particular, to respect the privacy, the appropriate privacy and respect of the families of those 4 teenagers.
Absolutely right. Although before today's tragic news was revealed, the parents of one of their 4 friends that went missing, Crystal Owens, said that she had no idea that her son was going camping, and if she had known that, then she would have told him not to, because the weather conditions were predicted to be pretty bad. But she had said that the 4 teenagers had come to North Wales, to Gwynedd, to apparently go camping, although, as I say, it's the time of year when the rain is particularly heavy, and the higher up altitudes here does mean it's colder and less forgiving than it would be in the summer months.
All right, Matthew, thank you for that. A very sad story indeed. Matthew Richards, thank you. Now, to Israel, Gaza. It is not peace in our time, but it may be at least peaceful for a time if a deal is done between Israel and Hamas. And there has been talk of hostages releases already over the last few weeks, but it does feel as though something is up right now. The Israeli War Cabinet started a meeting an hour ago, we believe. The Security Cabinet is due to be meeting about now. A full cabinet in an hour. Something may be falling into place. The senior advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is Mark Regev. And on the World at 1, he told Sarah Montague what would happen if the deal for the release of hostages is agreed.
If an arrangement is made for the release of hostages, so it requires a decision by the Israeli government, and that I think will be done very quickly. And then there's an added...
hours or days?
I think we're talking about hours. But then there's something that might take a touch longer. If an arrangement involves the release of Palestinians legally held in Israeli prisons because they've killed people, there's been arrangement in the past whereby families of those people who were killed by these individuals can petition the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court does a hearing, which would take a few more hours as well.
So that, in a way, encouraging news. Martin Regev looking at the procedures through which the Israeli system would be going to agree some kind of deal. And then in the last hour, the American President Biden has been speaking.
Now, very close, very close. We could bring some of these hostages home very soon. But I don't want to get into the details of things because nothing is done until it's done. And we have more to say, we will, but things are looking good at the moment.
President Biden optimistic, cautiously optimistic, I suppose you'd say. Well, our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman joins us from Jerusalem. Tom, do we know anything about what the draft deal would be were the deal is done?
Well, we do know a bit, and in particular, we've got more of the contours of this potential deal from a senior Israeli official speaking to the BBC in the last hour. Now, the terms that have been mentioned in this are the release of around 12 hostages per day, reaching up to a figure of around 50. In return for a 4-day ceasefire. And my sense about, and I've heard this before from another figure familiar with the negotiations over the last couple of weeks, the idea is this sort of phased release. So you get a few per day, and if the ceasefire keeps holding, you get the same number the next day. So that's part of this, and obviously what Hamas wants is the ceasefire holding. What Israel wants is the continuation of hostages being released. But at the same time, and you heard Mark Regev talking about this there, the release of some Palestinian prisoners held by Israel, and the focus on all of this on both sides would be on women and children.
Right. Now, I said there's a number of cabinet committee meetings going on in Israel as we speak. Do we know what timing to be looking at for here? Any idea?
Well, I think they'll do it pretty quickly. I mean, the meeting of the War Cabinet started just over an hour ago. They'll then go to the sort of wider Security Cabinet, and then a meeting of most of the government, or at least most of the senior ministers. And that would be to get sign-off on the point about releasing Palestinian prisoners, because that internally in Israel has the potential to be a thing that can be a stumbling block, particularly because there is that possibility for a legal challenge, as we're hearing now. But
well, they'll try and get all of this through pretty quickly. So that's in terms of the Israeli side. The other issue, of course, is about the logistics, because we've had only 4 hostages released so far out of around what's known about. There's thought to be about 40. That was much earlier on during the war, in 2 sets of 2. But so the situation on the ground was quite different then. So there was an issue of handover to the Red Cross and then delivered to the Israelis. But it's likely to be more complicated now because, particularly in the north, we've seen pictures of the intense damage and destruction, and it remains a very active war zone in parts of areas and still besieged there. That's why the ceasefire is important. It seems what Hamas wants is a cease also to aerial activity involving drone surveillance. Potentially, I think, because they don't want the Israelis to see where they're taking, where the start of the hostage release is from, because I think that would compromise them. So there does seem to be another element to this, which is about surveillance stopping as well. So it's quite complicated on the ground. Okay, well, we'll be speaking to a negotiator later in the programme. We'll keep across all those events. Tom Bateman, thank you very much. Now, it's exactly 5:05, and let's get some of the other headlines from
A group led by the American tech firm Palantir Technologies has been given a £330 million contract to build data system aimed to make it easier for health and care organizations to work together. The process of finding a new buyer for the telecom Spectator has been paused. Unfortunately, next month, which will dissolve a holding company on market value.
Next to at the COVID inquiry, it was Chris Whittle, Chief Medical Officer. He was on the back foot for some time, defending himself against the charge that he was elected to recognise the seriousness of the pandemic in the early days of 2020. He said he thought the civil servants did a very, very good job in difficult circumstances. The political system around the Prime Minister more mixed, he said. He thinks the council related to the first lockdown too late. He acknowledged he put arguments against the lockdowns. He wanted the disadvantages as well as advantages to be considered. But he thought any disagreements he had with the chief science officer, Patrick Wells, was small. He also acknowledged the difficulty in getting politicians to understand the science.
Do I think that most people around the table fully grasp lockdown and started to run exponentially? I suspect the answer to that is no, but I wouldn't want to interpret their thoughts.
No, but you recognise, of course, that one of the hugely important functions of the chief medical officer is to be able to get them to understand the seriousness of the position. I was doing my best.
Well, that's 2 days now of evidence from 2 of the most prominent voices of science during the pandemic at the COVID inquiry, not really being the relationship with politicians works perfectly. Someone who has practically written a book on the subject is Sir Jack Logan, author of When Science Meets Power, and he's advised various governments on policy, including UK, China, and the US, and was number 10's Director of Policy under Tony Blair in the early 2000s. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us. And what do you take out of what we've been hearing in the last couple of days? It was obviously a more fraught time for teaching politicians the science than usual, but what did you take out of it?
Well, the inquiry is correct where to put the blame, and there's quite a lot of blame to go around. But I think there is a bigger issue, which was very visible in the last 2 days, which is that politicians increasingly have to make decisions which involve a lot of science, not just on pandemics, climate change, artificial intelligence, and they're just not well prepared for this. They're almost the only group who get almost no training to help them do their job, and they flail around extreme Trump recommending detergent to other presidents, lemon cures. But I think Boris saying he would just follow the science is an example of that, because he didn't really understand that the science didn't tell him how to balance up these physical health, mental health, the interest of the old and the young, of the health versus the economy. And I think the whole inquiry of being a part of the government, often there was pretty good advice going in from there wasn't a capacity to really sit the Senate and help make balance.
scientists actually get structured here. The scientists think their job is to tell you what the menu is, I suppose, but it's always going to be for the elected politicians to pick the actual selection. Then they can't, the scientists themselves can't say, you have to do this or you have to do that. They have to say, this is the consequences of doing X or not doing Y.
Well, that was definitely the old scientists were over and that's been integrated partly due to the politicians don't necessarily have the capacity to do it. And they fucked on people like politicians who were playing the executive role, so they effectively making many decisions but weren't quite accountable. And there was a clash between their actual roles and their former roles. And I think in the future we're going to need to create new structures that probably are political and scientific, and we need scientists who are better trained to understand public attitudes, politics, and politicians who are much better prepared to understand science, data, statistics, all these things which are rushing onto their influence.
Didn't you travel around different countries looking at what they were doing in the pandemic after and all other issues? How do we compare?
Well, we looked last year at how countries around the world handled their thinking and intelligence. And what we're doing there's a fairly clear pattern with many often smaller countries in Scandinavia, East Asia, countries like New Zealand, on balance economy and mental health. And I think often they benefited from perhaps a tighter integration of the government between different bits, having much better relationships between national and local government. That was a big failure in the UK, and an ability to see it in the round. And Chris Whitty today talked about taking account of things like mental health effects. But my sense is early on in the pandemic there was a complete dominance of the classic medical theology, effectively with the reasons, and very little attention to the possible mental health effects of children. What was happening in care homes, which were largely neglected in those countries, that I think had a more balanced sense of the different factors.
Food for thought on this issue coming out of the inquiry in the last couple of days. It's a bit more on Chris Whitty tomorrow as Jeff Locke. Now tomorrow sees the Chancellor deliver one of his two annual set-piece financial statements. It's the autumn statement. Today, in advance of that, we come out to our London studio for some fresh air, take a look at what's happening in our economy and what people are thinking about the autumn statement. And today, we have taken advantage of a suggestion of a PM listener. We asked earlier this year for ideas and places for PM to visit. Sophie Hallam thought we should come to Sheffield and to the Harland Works facility in particular for a guide, I suppose, to the economy. So I went to meet Sophie this morning and a couple of the small businesses on site.
This is a former steelworks. We used to make the blades for tools. At the end of the courtyard of Portland Works, that is where stainless steel was invented globally, which is phenomenal.
And next to us, I think just over there,
Bramall Lane Stadium. The football stadium is just down there. Yeah.
And you brought us here because you get a little slice of lots of different pieces of life.
We do. We have a big variety of businesses, small businesses here. We have product designers that get stuff made in China. You know, we have people that make animation. We have theatre producers.
All right, so if we're going to meet a couple of your small businesses here, who are we going to meet?
So we're going to meet Maz of Maz Inc., the tattoo parlour, and Alistair of Norton Mayfield, the architects.
All right, let's go into the cafe and say hello. Right, Maz, how have things been going? Is it better now than when you started? Talk me through the trend.
Before COVID was quite nice, quite steady. Most of the stuff that I do is like full back pieces, arm sleeves. But since COVID, it's not been the same at all. People want something small.
So take me through. So before they might have had the whole arm fully sleeved in tattoo, and now it's I'll just have a little tattoo.
Yeah, people aren't wanting to commit to anything longer financially, really.
Oh, that's really interesting. All right, we also have an architect here. So Alistair, tell us about your business.
We're a team of 10 people and we specialise in residential development.
And is it mostly around Sheffield? around the city, or is it all over the country?
No, actually, we do currently about 90% of our work is in London and around 10% is Sheffield and the North.
One of the things for architects to have productive work to do is that there need to be construction workers who can actually execute the designs that offices like yours are producing. Has that been an issue? Because it has felt as though construction inflation has been much higher than a lot of other inflation, general inflation.
It's just the whole supply chain has been affected, and that has massively impacted the availability of labour, construction costs, and yeah, it's been a big challenge for the whole industry.
Let me just go around and ask you whether you're optimistic about 2024 or fearful about 2024, because it's not looking like you've had a lot of growth in the last few months, and interest rates are really beginning to bite. Sophie, what are you thinking next year?
So I am worried about the future because of my talents are these small businesses, and I do think it's quite hard, and some will fail and new ones will come along. It sounds a bit harsh, doesn't it?
That's capitalism.
I think there's definitely signs that there could be some improvements with potentially interest rates dropping, so that might unleash projects.
What would you be looking for in this autumn statement tomorrow? So it seems like the Chancellor thinks he's got a little bit of cash that he didn't think he would have. What is the issue that you would be kind of focusing on, you'd be listening up for?
So I'd really love him not to use it on inheritance tax. I would really hate it if that happens. What I'd really like to see myself is lifting the threshold that people start paying income tax. I think that would be fair because it applies the same to everybody. It would benefit people on the lower income scale the most.
I don't know, some hope of stability where people can actually trust, like that things aren't going to keep changing.
Alistair, what are you looking out for tomorrow?
The one thing that caught my idea was the proposed green rebate on stamp duty. So this is a proposal that if you buy a house and you pay stamp duty, if you do work to that house to improve thermal efficiency and improve the EPC rating, you can get a rebate on your stamp duty. We need to be making the
around £20 billion, enough to cut 3 pence off the basic rate of income tax to allocate as he wishes. He's previously indicated that business taxes will be prioritised to boost the economy's potential. But today, another Treasury Minister indicated households may too be in for tax cuts. There's been speculation about reducing inheritance tax, lower national insurance contributions, even cutting income tax. But any cuts would struggle to offset tax rises already underway. An earlier decision not to raise the threshold at which different rates of income taxes and national insurance apply in line with inflation means some 30 million income taxpayers have seen bills rise. That will continue until 2028, possibly netting the Treasury in excess of £50 billion and dragging 6 million more people into paying income tax. Mr Hunt will also have to avoid new tax cuts reigniting inflation. Earlier, the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, warned that risks remain. So, rates might not be coming down anytime soon.
We are concerned about the potential persistence of inflation as we go through the remainder of the journey down to 2%, and I think the market is underestimating that.
With living standards having fallen at their fastest rate since the 1950s, the Chancellor has his work cut out. It may be a late finish at the Treasury.
A review of the investigation into the disappearance of Nicola Bulley has found that police unnecessarily disclosed information about her personal issues that she was facing. The 45-year-old vanished in January near the River Wyre in Lancashire. The case prompted a frenzy of speculation and put the police under intense pressure. Around 6,500 articles were written about her in international news outlets, and TikTok videos on her disappearance were viewed 270 million times. Our correspondent Lisa.
For a brief period earlier this year, Nicola Bulley became one of the most talked about people in Britain. Lancashire police believed she had somehow fallen into the River Wyre while out walking her dog. They were right, but online conspiracy theorists thought otherwise and turned her disappearance into what the report said was a global social media frenzy. While she was missing, police revealed personal details about Ms. Bulley's struggles with alcohol and the menopause, a decision criticised by this review. Chief Constable Andy Marsh, the head of the College of Policing, acknowledged that shouldn't have happened.
We found due process was followed in this decision and it was lawful, but we were no doubt that using this information in a manner described here is both illegal and unnecessary.
Lancashire Police's decision-making process was examined in detail. Deputy Chief Constable Sasha Hatchett was from the constabulary.
The decision was made for safeguarding that had a clear rationale. Thankfully, we are not in a position where it's do this regularly, but we take account, we absolutely understand the public sentiment around the disclosure.
The report did also praise Lancashire Police for much of its investigative work. Its opportunities for non-reportable media briefings on her medical history, vulnerabilities, or sharing her status as a high-risk missing person were not taken. This helped disinformation take hold and spread.
You're listening to the 6 o'clock news on BBC Radio 4. The main news so far. US President Joe Biden said the military hospitals held in Gaza is now very close. Police searching for 4 teenagers missing after a camping trip in North Wales have found 4 bodies in an overturned car. Still to come.
I believe that football has become more than just a game. It's a powerful way to demonstrate that the Palestinian people, despite the challenges they face, are human beings. They have ambitions, dreams, and talents.
While Israel's war in Gaza continues, hope in the form of a World Cup qualifier involving the Palestinian national football team. England's Chief Medical Officer, Professor Sir Chris Whitty, has told the UK COVID inquiry there had been a systemic failure to react quickly enough in the early days of the pandemic. Sir Chris also said the government's use of the phrase "follow the science" had become a millstone around his neck, while he described Boris Johnson's way of making decisions as unique. Our political correspondent Helen Catt was at the hearing in central London.
Throughout the pandemic, ministers claimed they were following the science, a phrase that the government's leading medical advisor has now suggested was not helpful. Professor Sir Chris Whitty told the inquiry it had blurred important lines.
Very soon we realised it was a millstone around our necks and didn't help government either, because it blurred the distinction between the very firm, clear demarcation that last time did exist between technical advice and political decision, for which people are then answerable in the ballot box.
Sir Chris also dismissed suggestions made at the inquiry yesterday by the then Chief Scientific Advisor Sir Patrick Vallance that he had been more cautious about lockdowns than others. He said it had been important to be transparent about the downsides of restrictions. The professor also said he warned the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson in early 2020 that a pandemic was possible, and if it occurred, it was reasonable to think that 100 to 300,000 people could die. But he said that had failed to electrify government.
Had, let us say, the Director General of MI5 come in and said there is a possibility of 100,000 plus people sadly dying from a terrorist attack, the chances that this would have been a response and that the system would have continued as it did, I think is
Chris, who is still in post, said he was not criticising individuals. Asked about the operation around Boris Johnson, he said that it had been chaotic and conceded that the former Prime Minister had a way of making decisions that wasn't unique. But he was keen to stress that he believed other governments around the world were also in chaos.
The inquiry also heard about some of Professor Sir Chris Whitty's thought processes during the early days of the pandemic, as well as his relationship with other leading officials, as our health editor Hugh Penn explains.
The inquiry has revealed intriguing details of debates behind closed doors between Sir Chris Whitty and his senior colleagues in Whitehall, Sir Patrick Vallance and Sir Justin Brown, Deputy Chief Medical Officer in England, and at times there were differing opinions. Sir Patrick's already told the inquiry he would have gone earlier for the first lockdown in March 2020, and that Sir Chris was more cautious. Sir Chris has said today that the differences were small, and he was worried about the implications for deprived areas and public health as he weighed up the pros and cons of a stay-at-home order, but he conceded that lockdown happened too late. In mid-January, he was warned by Professor Van Tam that there was a risk of a significant pandemic. When the inquiry was told, Sir Chris said it was best to wait and monitor. Challenged on this, Sir Chris said there wasn't any clear alternative at that early stage, and he wouldn't have done things differently. The continuation of sporting events, such as the Cheltenham Racing Festival in the middle of March, even as infections were rising rapidly, has already been a source of intense debate. Sir Chris was argued that the risks of outdoor events were small relative to other things, but with hindsight it was sending the wrong message by giving the impression of normality. Things could have been done differently.
The group headed by the US-based technology firm Palantir has been awarded a £330 million contract to develop a new computer system for the NHS. The Federated Data Platform aims to make it easier for different healthcare organisations to work together by combining patients' information stored on separate systems. But critics, including the British Medical Association, have expressed concerns about how that data will be handled. Our senior technology reporter Chris Valance has more details.
The Federated Data Platform will help different bits of the NHS to talk to each other and connect the data they hold. The NHS says better use of data will help it tackle issues like waiting lists, and it says that the deal prohibits suppliers from using the data for commercial gain. But the contract to provide the system has been won by a group of businesses led by Palantir, a firm whose work for military and intelligence organisations and its billionaire Donald Trump-backing founder Peter Thiel make it a controversial choice for some. Palantir has said it can't use patients' data for its own purposes and stressed that the data belongs to the UK government. But the British Medical Association has previously urged the NHS to think again about awarding the contract to an external company. Already, critics are talking about a lack of clarity over key aspects of the programme. They want additional guarantees over how the data will be used.
There has been mixed reaction to news that Top Gear is being put on hold by the BBC. The corporation says the current version of the long-running TV series will be rested for the foreseeable future. Our entertainment correspondent David Silito reports.
When Top Gear's charismatic daredevil Freddie Flintoff, as he's widely known, ended up with serious facial injuries in an accident last year, the show was put on hold. And even 11 months on, little is known about what happened. Freddie's co-host Chris Harris says everyone agreed to keep quiet.
He's healing. Not so proud of the fact that Team Top Gear kept everything quiet and we were dignified.
Even the report on the accident is not being made public. However, a wider independent investigation into the show's safety policies, concluded procedures have been followed. Nevertheless, the UK show is being shelved. The word rested is the official phrase, but the original sting, Perry McCarthy, a tame racing driver who worked with Clarkson and Co in the noughties, thinks the programme is facing more than just a little lie down.
I personally don't think it's a little rest. I think the programme's been laid to rest. I think that there's no appetite from certain users inside the BBC to continue with the show. I'm not happy with that from a commercial perspective. I think it's the completely wrong decision.
Of course, Top Gear has been written off in the past. The old comfy cardigan-clad consumer show of the 80s and 90s, and Mary John's been having a lot of trouble changing her plots, was saved from cancellation when Jeremy Clarkson added comedy and some terrifying risk-taking. And the show's international variants will continue. Here, the Italian version. This is Top Gear French style. But it's the end for now for the UK version. The BBC has reached a financial settlement with Freddie Flintoff, and Top Gear, one of the corporation's best-known programmes, is now officially at rest for the foreseeable future.
The sale of the Telegraph newspapers and the Spectator magazine has been paused while Lloyds Banking Group assesses the details of an offer. The proposed deal comes from the Times.
It's like a pizza cutter from hell, right? It does. It looks like a giant pizza cutter.
It's a bone saw?
It is, yes. So it's a 19th century amputation saw. It's called the clockwork saw, and it never made it out of prototype phase. But it was invented in the 19th century by a guy named W.H. Winchester, and at the time he was obsessed with speed, because this is before anesthesia. People bought tickets to the operating theater, and they would come and they'd see this spectacle, and so he designed it, and it's basically a circular blade, and there would have been a crank in the middle, and you would have wound it up, released it, and it would spin continuously.
Well, what Winchester found out was that he overcorrected. So he goes into the operating theater, he thinks this is great speed. And he finds out it's really unwieldy, and he ends up taking off his assistant's fingers instead of the leg he intended to take off. So it was a massive failure.
So why was the focus on being as quick as he could be?
Before anesthesia, the patient would feel everything. So you would literally be fighting the patient in some cases. In fact, there was a surgeon named Robert Liston who's 6'2", he's incredibly tall at this time. He was really strong, he could take off your leg in under 2 minutes. So this is what you would want. And there are stories of patients jumping off the table and running across the room, locking themselves in a closet, and him tearing the furniture off and dragging these people back to the table and performing the procedure. So it was awful.
He sounds fit. Is it? As fit as that, he just sounds fit though, doesn't he?
Is this why orthopedic surgeons are historically good at rugby? There's sort of a stereotype in the NHS that orthopedic surgeons are quite strong in rugby players.
Well, I know that there was this kind of hangover from this guy named William Halstead, who was a surgeon in the 19th century, and he was a massive coke addict, and he would just work all the time. And so there's this culture in surgery that you work until you drop, and that's really a Halstead hangover from the 19th century.
So is your best medicine to be an incredibly ripped public school boy?
No, I love the problem saw because it really illustrates something that I don't think is discussed enough in medicine and science, which is failure. So for every idea that succeeds, there are values that fail, and oftentimes those failures lead to the eventual successes. I think we can all agree that any surgery before anesthesia was awful. So what I hope to do is convince you by telling you how the adoption and advent of anesthesia came about through a series of failures. These drugs were known to people. In 1772, laughing gas was first discovered by Joseph Priestley. People were having laughing gas parties, but they weren't putting together that these drugs could have a clinical use.
Oh, so they're seeing it only as a sort of a fun thing, not anything.
Right. So everybody's using it recreationally.
Yeah, it's like when you find out Adam Sandler is also a good actor.
And then the other way that failure plays a role in the story, there's this dentist named Horace Wells. In the 1840s, he goes to see a demonstration of nitrous oxide. So Wells, who's a dentist, is thinking this might have some kind of practical use. So the next day, he goes back to his clinic and he gasses himself and he has a tooth pulled, and it's a miracle, he can't feel anything. So he sets up a public demonstration in Boston. But what happens during the demonstration is the gas is administered incorrectly, and the patient yells out, and everybody in the audience was dicks. They were like, boo, and it was terrible. And so he leaves Boston.
That club. Wherever that is, I've done that.
He leaves Boston in absolute disgrace, and later he becomes addicted to chloroform, so he fails to convince the medical community that nitrous oxide laughing gas is useful, so it's failure on every level. But the story thankfully doesn't end there, because Wells had a protege named William Morton, and Morton was also a dentist, and around this time he's thinking about these drugs, and he comes in contact with ether.
Can I ask, I don't know what ether is.
It's a liquid.
It is a liquid.
It becomes a gas.
Okay. And doctors, when ether was discovered, they were trying this stuff, and they were having ethereal experiences. That's where we get that phrase. So he follows in Wells' footsteps, and he decides to do a big public demonstration in Boston as well. Unlike Wells, it's a big success, and a patient has a tumor excised from his neck, he doesn't feel anything, and the age of agony is over. But what happens after that is Morton decides there's money to be made. He's American, by the way, so he decides there's money to be made. So he adds sweet-smelling oils to the ether mix, and he tries to patent it. But everybody knows it's not the sweet-smelling oils, it's the ether that's important. And so in trying to make money off of it, he inadvertently spreads word about the powers of ether.
Wow, so he basically failed to patent something, and that has moved us forward medically.
Yeah, so there was a lot of failure, and I think also we have to recognize that medicine's quite conservative too. That, you know, it often takes someone from the outside with a big idea that's challenging the status quo. But this is why I think failure is the best medicine.
And look at it this way, at the end of the show, if I don't pick you, you're still a winner, kid.
Hi. Good man.
Aaron Vincent, what is
Congrats.
your best medicine?
I say detection, because I think
that's our job.
Who's a man?
To deduce the cause for the problems that patients come to us with, so that we can give them the treatment. When I was at medical school, I was really into Sherlock Holmes, which I suppose is a long way of saying I didn't have a girlfriend. And you know, Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, was a doctor. He trained as a urologist. Yeah, his PhD was on neurosyphilis.
And so that inspired you?
not neurosyphilis, but the idea that actually because the symptoms of diseases of the nervous system can be so wacky.
I can also sort of relate to this because I always wanted to get into comedy because ever since I was a kid I loved the idea of being heckled by stag do's. So how do you use detection in your job then?
So you have to try and piece together the symptoms that people give you. Also know how to describe things because people haven't read the textbook. You know, a classic one is someone comes in and goes, oh, my throat's smell. What does that mean? Is our job to like, I saw someone recently came into this weird fishing boat. Sort of asked her about it. It's a bit cheap. And then she said, oh, well, I get it mainly at night.
They say, he is! No, I'm not up to anything, it's just your dodgy light. Don't turn the light on.
So first you say, so, is it no, it wasn't. She had lost sensation in her whole. And the weird thing about her nervous system is that it likes to fill in holes. So even though she lost vibration sensation, her brain is going, hang on, that's not right. I'm going to fill this in with extra vibration sensation. And so she felt this sensation of vibration, especially in her brain. And that was actually because of inflammation.
How else do you detect?
I saw someone who came and said, my left leg, that's the problem, my left leg. I feel what was wrong. And I said to him, tell me about your right leg. And he looked at me and he was like, oh, this one I can understand. As soon as I answered that question, he was like, this is. And I said, what happens when you've got my leg? I can't translate it. But I didn't want to say that because I don't know what to say. My problem is that my left leg is weak. Well, to a neurologist, that's going to say, okay, well, it's probably but that's where the problem is. Because you just told me two pathways, and there's only one place that those two cross. Right?
That is absolutely amazing. What is that condition?
So it's this really weird condition called Brown Sequard syndrome. So it's named after this 19th century neurologist.
How did he deduce this condition?
So he was born in Mauritius, and he was in Mauritius at that time, sugarcane plantations, and killed them with machete. So there were lots of people on machete, which had resulted in damage to heart. So he became really famous, went crazy after that, he injected himself with ground-up testing, and he really survived it.
I'm amazed that you got a syndrome after it and not a court order. What was he doing with the guinea pig cats?
He ground them up and injected them into his head. But probably what he was doing was
Is that a syringe full of monkey testicles or are you just pleased to see me?
Just to be clear, I don't think it's okay. So, yeah, Arthur Conan Doyle actually wrote it for the Sherlock Holmes stories. Yeah, so the adventure of the creepy man is the Sherlock Holmes story. A professor who injects himself with monkey testicles.
And that's based on him?
Yeah. I've not seen that one, I have to.
That makes me Benedict Cumberbatch doing that. Okay, Aravinda, why is detection the best medicine?
Because it underlies what we do. You know, it is the wisdom of medicine. That's the thing that we can give is be able to understand this language of symptoms and piece it together into a diagnosis and then help a person find a different.
Okay, Kevin, what do you think is the best medicine?
For me, the best medicine is giving cancer herpes. So,
And will itching to find out more?
I'm going to help you scratch that itch. We've spent the last 100 years trying to poison or blast cancer to death, and everything has really been focused around these very toxic treatments. But in the last 20 or 30 years, we've understood actually that we can take biological agents, in this case a virus, a herpes simplex virus, which actually is a really beautifully evolved machine that exists purely for the purpose of getting inside the cell, and there its only job in life, its only interest is to make copies of itself and cause disease. And so we see that as cold sores, we see it as genital herpes, for instance. But we can take those viruses now, and we can turn these viruses into essentially molecular robots that go and do our bidding in cancer cells, and we can use them as therapies.
Oh my gosh, so you're dressing up the therapy in like a herpes costume.
Yeah, it's one hell of a fancy dress party.
This is incredible. So how do you reprogram herpes to sort of do your bidding?
It's tricky. So you had to understand, how does herpes cause disease? And if you know the bits of the genetic code that make up a herpes virus, which isn't very much, it's only 150,000 letters. You and I are made of 3 billion letters. So we're much more complex than herpes, I'm pleased to say. You find that piece of DNA in the herpes and you cut it out with some molecular scissors, a pair of tweezers, you remove it, you take another piece of DNA that you've grown, you pop that into the spot, you stick it back together with some molecular glue, and you've made a transgenic virus. That virus is now no longer able to cause disease, and this virus, when you inject it into cancer cells, is programmed to grow only in cancer cells, not in normal cells. And it kills them, and better still, if you put the right mixture of genes in that virus, you make that into a machine that waves red flags to the immune system. So now
The interpreter still only understood about 3/4 of what she said, but at least her statement is finally done.
Once again, we come back to the language issue. When I talk in my own Sudanese dialect, she could not understand me. I needed to do an effort so that I let her understand what I am saying. To tell you the truth, she was a kind person, and when I correct her, she's smiling. Then I have nothing against her. The appointment of today is the first step in the right direction.
The Metropolitan Police said it was sorry to hear about Fatima's experiences. It says where an interpreter is required, it sources them from its national database of interpreters, which is regularly audited to make sure those on it remain suitable. Fatima's first interview was arranged by a different police force, which told us it's actively working with the agency Language Line, which sourced the interpreter, to determine what steps are needed to ensure victims receive the right support. Language Line added the interpreter was fully qualified and has worked for the agency for a decade, saying it had received no complaints regarding assignments completed by the interpreter. Despite any improvements national reviews of justice and health may bring, time may be running out. The interpreter's brain drain continues. 50 people, that's almost 1 in 10 in the National Register, who responded to our survey said they didn't think they'd still be working in the sector in a year. But people like Fatima show how vital it is we get this right. And having been through her ordeal, she's now set her sights on becoming an interpreter herself.
I want to do this to help a lot of people who have the language barriers. I personally had this experience. I struggled a lot, and I want to give the better side of it. With the will of God, I will raise my daughter in a way she will have her status in life, and I will get her a secure future. I have a lot of dreams.
The producers of tonight's programme were Ben Robinson and Surya Elango.
For 25 years, BBC Radio 4's Crossing Continents has been telling the human stories behind the headlines.
Let me tell you about the first time I went to a party. Having a party is illegal in Iran.
The award-winning programme takes you across the globe.
So we were involved in this political movement. I just followed my heart.
With the biggest stories and the people at the centre of them.
active because the laws are against you aren't accurate.
Crossing continents, beginning with Florida's homegrown medicinal migrants, returns to Radio 4 and BBC Sounds this Thursday morning at 11. Now Radio 4, in touch with Peter White. Good evening. Tonight we seesaw wildly between the ultra-modern and the deeply traditional. After all, what could be more traditional than music falling in love?
I've done a lot of Parkrun and I was introduced to Mike, who guided me around Parkrun, and we just kind of clicked. We just started getting to know each other and chatting along the way. You know, the more miles we ran, the more we got to know each other.
More about Love on the Run later in the programme. But first, the very latest on what seems certain to be a highly digital future for all of us, visually impaired people included. But that's the point. Will we sleep, or will we be left behind as the pace of change continues to gather speed? After all, it doesn't matter what you do these days, work, shop, bank, learn, seek healthcare, date, technological literacy is becoming increasingly vital. Hence the importance of a conference last week hosted by AbilityNet, that's a charity which promotes the use of technology for visually impaired people. The conference involved many of the big players in this field: Google, Microsoft, Sony, some of the big banks, and describes itself as championing digital accessibility and the business case for inclusivity. So, did it live up to its billing? Robin speaks.
As a runner, you go through different stages and you feel like you can't do it and you're struggling, you're combating with yourself. And normally you experience that by yourself, so you can go through those emotions. But of course, when being guided, I'm directly next to Kelly, so when she's saying I can't do this, I really hate this, and it's quite a skill to not take that personally, to understand she's just going through those various levels and phases of the challenge of the long duration. But yes, the cross country was probably our only time we did have a disagreement, but we agreed at the end like we always do.
Just one more question about one thing that was pointed out to me when you were on television. Mike, you're quite a lot taller than Kelly, aren't you?
Yes. I'm 5'11", and Kelly, she's probably correctly 4'10" and or 9 and 3. A little bit, yes. That's the important bit, that little.
So how does that work? Presumably that will have an effect on your stride as well, won't it, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, Mike would just have to try and match my stride, unfortunately, but what we do is the tether is on Mike's lower arm so that I can reach it. We use the rumble tag, so it's on his lower arm and then I hold the handle rather than putting it any further up. So it works fine, and actually now, sometimes when I run with someone my own height or something height, it feels weird. I kind of got used to my arm being slightly up.
Right. So do you mind shortening your stride, Mike?
Oh, not at all. The ramble tag has allowed Kelly to naturally swing her arms now, where previous to that it's quite static and cause a bit of aches and pains and so forth. But it does come naturally now, and I can use that as a base if she's struggling or she can go quicker. So it's a good feedback mechanism.
So are you going to carry on running now that you are hitched?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Yeah, always looking forward to the next running challenge. We have applied for the Berlin Marathon next year, so if we got in that'd be quite nice, and that'd be our next challenge. But for now, we'll probably carry on with our park runs, which we love. We just love the whole community of park run. Sometimes we go just walk it and really enjoy that. And Mike and I both volunteer in park, so we love all the aspects of it in a different ways that people can get involved. So that's really nice.
Right. Well, look, many congratulations, Kelly Barton, Mike Leatherbarrow. We wish you all the best, both with running and with married life. Thank you. And that's all for today. You can email us with your comments, in touch at bbc.co.uk. You can leave us a voice message on 0161836 1338 or go to our website bbc.co.uk/in-touch. For me, Peter White, producer Beth Hemmings, and studio managers James Bradshaw and Simon Highfield. Goodbye. Thanks, Peter. That phone number again, 0161